able to read those. At the bottom of that first slide is it's a URL to a folder for tonight's webinar, where you'll be able to find the slideshow as well as all the exercises that we'll go over. We might not go over all 4 that I have in that folder, but you feel free to access that. And if you have trouble, if I messed up the sharing permissions on that folder, just let me know. I'd be happy to fix that for you. Tonight, we are in the midst of what is a 3-part series on data in DataClassroom, and it's working with your own data. So we'll go over how to import data into DataClassroom, and we'll spend most of the time we have together talking about best practices for formatting that data before you import it. That's usually the part that students struggle with the most up front, and with a couple good examples and a couple exercises, I found that they catch on very quickly to why the industry standard is something that we call tidy data. But before we do that, just give you a quick introduction to who I am. I am Nigel Standish. I'm the Director of Ops for DataClassroom. Been with DataClassroom just a little over a year now. I was a high school math and science teacher. Started teaching in 2001. And after teaching in the classroom, I was a survival instructor in the Air Force for a few years, and then made the transition back to civilian life, went to UVA for a PhD in instructional tech, taught university students for a while, worked in the public school system as an administrator for a few years, and then came on to DataClassroom. And I'm happy to be with you tonight. And since we are a smaller group, please feel free at any time to unmute and interrupt me. I will try to also, Rachel, keep a tab on the chat, but you should know that I'm just old enough to not be great at texting. All right, here we go. I'll throw this in the chat. There we go. All right. That was my office for my years as a survival instructor, living in shelters and waking up to beautiful views of lakes and forests. But I'll tell you this, nothing is as beautiful as well-formatted data. Am I right? It just gets everybody up in the morning, doesn't it? So let's jump over to DataClassroom. And you will, when you log into DataClassroom, you'll see this is your dashboard. Your dashboard kind of has some menu items up at the top where you can navigate. It has the resource library banner where you can go and find all of the curated data sets that we provide, which are a great starting spot for any data learner or any data teacher. But eventually, you'll want to unlock some of the most powerful features of DataClassroom by importing your own data. And you can do that by clicking the green Import Data button on the left-hand side of the screen. When you do that, you'll come up with the list of ways that you can import your data. You can fetch it from Google Drive. You can upload a spreadsheet from your computer. That can be an Excel formatted spreadsheet. It can be a CSV file. You can paste data directly just using your Control-C or Control-V buttons right in here. Remember to choose whether you have a header or not in your data. And then, of course, you can just create an empty table and enter data yourself. I will tell you that just the way that my workflow goes personally is I still document data either on paper or in Google Sheets. That's how I collect data, and then I bring it back to the office, format, and import to DataClassroom. I have found that it just doesn't work for me to collect data in DataClassroom. So that's just how I personally do it. Everybody has their own idiosyncrasies, of course, when it comes to collecting and formatting data. But before we import data, I'd like to just talk a little bit about how machines look at data. So when we open up a data set, we as humans have an incredible ability to understand very complex and disorganized data that we see, whether it's in a spreadsheet or just out the car window. But machines don't have that same capability, and so they like to see data organized and structured in a particular way. And that way is each variable forms a column, and each observation forms a row, and together they become a table. Another way to look at that is you can see in this slide, our variables are country, year, cases, and population. The observations are across in the rows, and then those columns and rows together create a table that we see. And we refer to our observations as values, whether they be numbers or letters or words. For example, if we look at this collection of data, we don't have any trouble understanding what's happening here. We can see that we're counting the number of feet, that these three mammals have 4 feet, the reptiles, one has 0, one has 4, and the birds, eagle and ostrich, both have 2. There's blank rows, but our brains assimilate that and ignore it. There's multiple classes in a column, but it doesn't matter. Our brains are able to handle that. But a computer, a machine, would have a difficult time, whether you're using SPSS, SAS, R, Python, or DataClassroom, just have a difficult time parsing this, visualizing and analyzing it for us. And so we need to transform this untidy data into tidy data, where each column is our variable. You can see our variables actually are animal, number of feet, and class, and each of our rows are observations. Now, the computer, the machine, will have a very easy time parsing this and helping us visualize and analyze. Before we go in and start doing our own practice, with that quick introduction to tidy data, the reasons for it, why we do it, why we should be teaching it, why it's best practice, are there any questions? Welcome, Sandra. Glad you could join us.
Just so you know, the link that you provided us, we need access to view it.
Kimberly, thank you for doing the hard work and calling me out.
No problem.
All right, here we go. We are going to I'm going to do that right now. I hope that you don't mind. Only people with copy that link. All right, I'm going to put it in the chat first. Let's try that one, and then I'll put it in the PowerPoint as well.
It works now. Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that very much. All right, we're all good. We'll open up a couple of the worksheets and go through them together. Please, again, just feel free to unmute and holler at me. I am working from home with a couple of my boys tonight, so I'm on a single screen. So when I go and start working on the spreadsheets, I won't be able to see your faces. All right, so let's open up that exercise that we were just looking at, the animal feet. And we can see here, this might be a pretty common way that we might collect data and write it down. We might, horse, dog, cat, we quickly throw in mammal there. Okay, snake and turtle, reptile, a bird, eagle, and ostrich. But if we take a moment and we ask ourselves, how many variables do I actually have in here? I think that with a data set this small, we quickly come to the conclusion, all right, so we probably have class, then, number of feet would be another variable, and then finally maybe animal would be one here. And sometimes tidy data is referred to as long data because it tends to squish the data into fewer columns, but more rows. And somebody who is more informed than I am might call me out. Are all of these things animals scientifically? I don't know. I'm asking. And you can see there that we can grab this data now. We can copy it. We can go to DataClassroom here, and I'm going to paste it right in there. I'll call this animal feet and click save. And you can see that we've taken this, small data set and have imported it into DataClassroom. Now, since this is the first time tonight that we have imported a data set, I'd just like to point out a couple things about DataClassroom and the types of prompts that it gives you after you import to help you set up your table for success. You can see that we have a check mark now with data import in our workflow panel here, but under prepare, we have a caution sign. And the pop-up says something in this step might need fixing. So if we click on what could be need fixing, we see, hey, no description has been entered. This is always a good idea because it reminds us and others who are looking at our data where we got it, what it's about, how it was collected, etc. For this data set, I'm just going to click ignore. And then it says there is a column or columns that have not had their type set. So we need to fix that for sure. If I click on learn more, I get a pop-up about the different types of variables that there are. You can learn more in the user guide if you decide. We tried to use as few words as possible to kind of describe each type of variable. So I'm going to fix this. A class type, categorical, number of feet, numeric, animal type, categorical. And now you can see that we've got 2 check marks. The data import's good, the prepare's good, and I'm ready to go on to graphing, my data that I have. Coming back to this for one last look, you can kind of see again the typical way, or a way that might be typical for us to collect data or document data, and then taking that non-tidy data and putting it into a format, which we call tidy format, so that the machine can analyze and view that data. Any questions before we go on to the next data set? Welcome, Winston. I am glad that you are here. All right. And did we ever get, or were you just, that question about whether they were all animals, did you just say, Nigel, that is the stupidest question I've ever heard, and I'm not going to answer that? Is that what you all decided collectively? I couldn't see. All right. Well, next data set is sharks and seals. Sharks and seals is an interesting data set because there's not one right way. There's a couple ways that we can work on this. Before I start sharing those possibilities, I'd like you just to take a moment, maybe 10 seconds, look at this data and think about how many variables you see. And if we polled the room, I bet that we would come up with at least 2 different answers. It is exciting to have someone from Myanmar, Winsome. We're glad that you're here tonight, or probably very early this morning for you. So let's take a look at a couple of different ways. First of all, let's just give this a copy here, and let's transform it by pasting. Did that do it? There we go. And we'll do the same for number of seals. I copy that, and then I right-click and click Paste Special with Transposed, and it flips it. We'll put month in here. All right, so we kind of have our data more vertical now, which we're getting closer to tidy format. And then, you might remove one of these. Like you might say, hey, we're just going to do the month, the number of sharks, and the number of seals. And depending on the type of visualization and analysis that you wanted to run in your data software, this could be a completely valid way to set up this data. Another way to make it even more tidy and I think more flexible would be like this, where you still have 3 variables, which is your months, your sightings, and your species. But you can see now this gives the data software an opportunity to create a 2-value categorical variable, which would give you a little more flexibility in how you visualize the data here. You notice that in this data set, we also have blanks when it comes to seal sightings. And what you do with blanks is often can be controversial, right? Because especially when we weren't the researchers or scientists that collected the data, we don't know whether in January were they looking for seals and they found none. In that case, that would be 0. But if in January they were only counting sharks and they just ignored seals because they were going to go on a different day to count seals, then 0 would be inaccurate. Um, DataClassroom has a pretty it's pretty flexible in dealing with blank data. It won't include blank data in some visualizations and analysis unless you tell it to. It doesn't default to 0 in that way, and it can separate the shark data from the seal data, so it won't give you misinformation, and you can choose to treat that data however you like in a flexible way. Any questions, concerns, or comments about the sharks and seals and how we transformed that data set from untidy to tidy?
Only that if I had students doing this, missing data means that you weren't there looking, and no data is a 0.
Is a 0. And I think so. I don't actually know the researchers that collected this data, so I don't have a definitive answer of whether this was a 0 or a blank. But I think that if my students were making an argument on this kind of practice data for either one, that would be a good conversation, right? For zeros or for blanks. I like that one because it does leave a little ambiguity, and encourages conversations either way. And I don't have the final answer either. All right, so that was exercise 1 and exercise 2. Let's look at exercise 3, which is our plastics data set. This is an interesting one because initially, when we take a look at this this data, we might think, oh, it's already in tidy format. But before we go on, once again, just take 10 seconds, if you will, and try to come up with how many variables you see in this data set. All right, and there was a request in chat from Winsome. Would you mind making it a little bigger? Winsome, is it my screen that's small? Oh, I know it. I know what you want. I figured it out. Thank you for helping me. How is that? Is that better? I think I could even, let's try 135. How's that? Hopefully that's better. All right. Sorry about that. All right, 3. Okay. So yeah, we have the day. This is actually a very interesting data set that was collected by a high schooler in New Jersey. And what she did was she grew plants in dirt, which was no plastic. She grew plants in dirt that had 10% plastic, in 50% plastics, and then she grew plants that had no dirt and were 100% plastics. and she measured their height as they grew. And you can see, on day one, obviously all the same. Day two, a little bit of difference. Day three, until we get down to day 9, which there's quite a bit of difference. Now, the days are not consecutive days, but they are days of observation. And I don't remember how many days were in between the observations, but I do remember that they were all equal in there. So this one was a really fun one to watch and help with. And if we look at our variables, we can see, do we think day would be, a variable? I think so. Some nodding there. I'm alt tabbing back and forth. And then maybe percent plastics. Was that another one? And then finally, height would be the third one. Did anybody see any others besides those 3? Day amount of plastic and yep. Yeah, so let's take a look at the tidy format of this and see if anything stands out as surprising to you. Let's go down to our solution here. We can see day, plastic level, and height in centimeters. And then we start to get a feeling for why tidy data is sometimes called long data. We've taken a fairly short but wide data set, and in putting it into 3 variables, we've created quite a long data set here. Now, as far as formatting percentages go, this is just fine, but it would also be okay to assign these numbers or to transform them into decimals. Any of those are going to be fine in any of the data software that you might be using, including DataClassroom. And then finally, our third variable of height in centimeters is recorded for each one. This format, as you can see, it's starting to get a little bit bigger as far as data sets go. And probably, if you're like me, your brain was able to comprehend this format more easily than it is this format. And that is to be expected with smaller data sets. However, if our data set had been 900 days instead of just 9, even this format would become very hard for our brains to analyze or deduce anything from. And so putting it in tidy format, importing it into our data analyzation software, and visualizing it that way will help us find any trends or any significant change that she discovered in growing her plants in 0% plastic to 100% plastic. All right, we've gone through 3 data sets, or 3 practice data sets now. Are there any questions that have come up? All right. We still have a few more minutes. I think enough time to open the 4th data set. So let's go ahead and do that. It is tidy data set number 4. It's called the fly data set. And this data set is going to bring to the fore a couple of different issues and points that I'd like to bring out about collecting data. So, for example, the first one is, we can see that it's pretty neat and orderly, but we've got more than one variable in a column. and probably needs a little tidying up. The other is there's some things here that we might not know about. And as data collectors and data analyzers, it is often good practice to just document a little bit about what variables are being collected, how they're being collected, which is why it's important once we import to put a little description of what's going on. And students can find in the resource library, all of our data sets have examples of descriptions and variable descriptions as well to kind of help prod them along the documentation best practice route. So let's take another 10 seconds here and just think about how many variables we might find in this data set. All right. So I imagine by a show of invisible mental hands, how many of you came up with 4? There's no need to make us all uncomfortable here. So we'll just do invisible hands. 4. What about 5? Oh, there we go. All right. I appreciate it. We're all friends here. And now let's just flip over and, we can see that we've got high temperature here and room temperature. So temperature or environment looks like a variable to me. So that's 1. Fly ID, having an identifier is quite common and necessary in a lot of data sets. So that'll be a variable 2. And then 3, height climbed. 4, the Wombakia, either negative or positive, and then the drug treatment. Let's go see our solution. And we do have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We've got the ID on the left, and then the height climbed, and then finally the temp treatment here. And once we've taken, these 4 data sets and kind of looked at the questions that surround taking a data set from just data collection in the field to a tidy format that our data analysis software can read easily and perform visualization and analysis for us, I hope that we kind of see that the questions we ask of our data are important questions anyway. Like what are our variables? And what variables belong in the same row together? What observations belong together? And what separates our variables from each other? And once we begin asking those questions, unconsciously, we're beginning to explore our data set and formulate, what our data set can answer as we analyze it. So let's take that last data set we did and import it again into DataClassroom. I'm going to just select our data set here, and I'm going to Control-C to copy it. I'll go over to DataClassroom. So I will leave our animal feet. I'll click Import Data again. And I will use the paste copy cells here, which include a header column. I will Control-V to import. I will say fly dataset. And then once again, we don't have a description yet, so that's going to give us a little error. And then here, instead of just categorical and numeric, we've got an identifier column. And then height climbed is numeric. This is going to be categorical. Our treatment's going to be categorical. Temp treatment will be categorical. And then we're ready to throw up some graphs and take a look at the different interactions and start asking some questions about the data set that we've collected. So as we wrap up tonight, I will stay on until you don't have any more questions to ask. Let me just give you the last and final slide, which has contact information for all of us at DataClassroom. Some of you have been emailing with me back and forth for a little while, and know that I try to get back to you as quickly as possible. And if I don't know something, then I pass you on to people that are way smarter than I am. You're always free to set up a help session with me at your convenience, where we just do a one-on-one Zoom, or if you have some colleagues that want to come, that's fine as well. And I can answer specific questions that way. I want to thank you all very much for coming tonight. Thank you for all that you do for our kiddos. It's greatly appreciated. I greatly admire everything that educators do. And with 2 young boys, I am eternally grateful for good teachers. I'm going to stop the recording.